So one of the ideas behind the Truesdell piece is to mix practices from both classical chamber and jazz music. So what were some of the challenges for you in approaching a piece like this? How did you rehearse the Truesdell?
Well, we began it the way that we like begin any piece, just trying to get the notes to line up together, trying to all
Mm,
figure out our own parts and figure out how our parts relate to each other's. But then, like as you already mentioned, there was this element of making this sound like jazz, this
mm,
thing we can all hear if it's working or not, but maybe don't have the experience to capture, that feel of it. So, we ended up spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to swing and how to, be a little bit more behind the beat. Classical music tends to be very much,
mm,
things in tempo, in line, correct, right? Everything lining up really precisely with the beat. Whereas in jazz, it seems there is that precision, but it just has a completely different paradigm. So for
mm.
us, we had to kind of get out of the classical box or try to, and try to be a little bit more laid back and make it sound more comfortable, which for us made us more uncomfortable, but to try to have the thing just kind of flow and to understand Truesdale's language, as a
Mm.
composer, whatever idiom he was capturing.
Yeah, that I like what you said about being relaxed. I mean, I started off in the classical world playing violin, so it's like I don't know. It's weird. You're taught to be, so sturdy and like you gotta be, you have to be fully in control. You can't be too relaxed, otherwise it's not going to sound good. But with the true still, what you're saying about relaxing, it's a lot harder than you think, especially when you're coming from the classical world.
Right,
Um, yeah.
right.
Um, so were there any differences between how you practice the true style versus how you might practice anything else?
Um, yes, actually, I think I was like with metronome work, I would use a backbeat. So instead,
Mm,
I would put the metronome on the band around 2 and 4 to try to feel that way. And also just trying to get the feeling of swing when it was appropriate. There's
mm,
also he's had a really interesting harmonic language and trying to figure out how to voice and stack and temper those chords was also really challenging for us and for me as the bass line. It was difficult. Much easier to play, when we're playing with Darryl Harper, for example, because he already has that feel, and so it was a little easier to sort of by osmosis kind of go along with what he was trying to lay down.
mm.
Um, but just sort of constantly reminding ourselves or reminding myself at least that it was a different hat to wear. At the same time, though, still trying to be authentic. The piece was written for clarinet and string quartet, so I'm sure the composer had that understanding in mind, that there are classical elements that we used in terms of the way we made sound and the way we handle certain rhythms, um,
Mhm.
that sort of made for a lot of rhythmic and uh, timbral variety.
Mm. Yeah, I didn't really think about that. I whenever I think about the Truesdale, I really just think about the like the rhythmic, like the kind of jazz side of it. But I forget that it was written for a string quartet.
Right.
So it's not just violinists being jazz players, jazz musicians. It's more blended than that. So yeah.
Yeah, I see work like that as sort of like it's like an invitation. It's like opens the door for the
Mm,
classical musician to experience something else.
yeah. So going to the recording process now, in what ways was the recording process similar or different from other recordings you've done?
Well, we did a lot more takes with this
Mm,
one. And that's where it sort of really things came to pass. We had fortunately the pleasure and opportunity to perform the piece like 5 or 6 times, I think, before the recording session.
mm,
And to sort of have this feel that we were all, working to understand, and then to have the precision that you need on a recording. The recording is the least forgiving way to present something.
mm,
Um, so it took a lot of energy and a lot of concentration,
mm,
and it just it wasn't that different from some classical recordings. It was just it would I would compare it to the most difficult of things that I've recorded, even though the notes weren't as difficult. Just trying to lay down, these things that are unusual to us, unfamiliar to us. It was definitely outside of our comfort zone, and rhythmically, actually, it was very challenging. Not just getting the feel of it, but the rhythms themselves provided a challenge, because it was just in a more jazz idiom. And I feel like the classical system that we read works very, very well for classical music, where things are lined up and there's this sort of rhythmic grid going on for the most part, where that grid doesn't fully apply to jazz. It would have to be, that we would really need a totally different system of, or we need a different way to interpret the system of notation. And in recording situations under pressure, and having to be able to repeat things consistently so that things can be spliced together, I think that made for a great challenge for all of us.
Yeah. I actually met with Darryl, Professor Harper, earlier today. He showed me this tune by Stevie Wonder, Cash in Your Face. And I'm not sure if you are familiar with it, but you're
Um,
listening to it, it's just standard, four on the floor, and then it's, well, not four on the floor, but four common time. I
mhm.
had a brain fart. But then, all of a sudden there's just like this random clap out of nowhere. And I'm just like, whoa, what is this? Like, where does this fall on a grid? Can you even count this? And he's just like, no, like you can't count it. This is just feel. And stuff like that. It's just, you know, it's really amazing. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, me too. The tricky thing sometimes is that you can tell whether it's right or not. You can tell whether it's in the pocket or in the groove or not. But yet,
Mhm.
you know, having the tools and experience to define it is a totally different story.
Yeah. So how would you describe your personal relationship with improvised music? Does it play a role in your teaching or your performing?
Am I performing more than my teaching? Um,
Mhm.
I have done a lot of just sort of free improv, or a fair amount of free improv. Never really within, not over changes usually. With a few times I've had to work over changes, but mostly it's been just sort of free, atonal usually, or yeah, definitely atonal, whether it be dissonant and sort of avant-garde or just like over a drone or something like that. Um, so for me too, it's a different story to improvise within such a structured thing as jazz. And the Truesdell piece didn't actually require that. If
Mhm.
anything, it formed my improvisation outside of that piece. Um,
Mhm.
I think he did a good job of sometimes emulating, an improvised style.
Mhm. Could you say more about, you said it influenced your improvisation outside of the Truesdell?
Yeah, because hearing these harmonies and hearing these rhythms, it
Mhm.
really mind opening. It's much different than
Mhm.
that I played before. It wasn't so unusual that it was difficult you know, to to understand, like as a listener, but as a player, it was a different story. And so it kind of, I think it opened my horizons a bit, and you can
Mhm.
sort of take those sounds and those styles and those timbres and all that, and add that to my improvisatory style, which is for the most part influenced still by classical music.